Hello, I'm Rollo Pignol for the New Culture Forum, Britain's leading cultural think tank. So we're here, Birmingham, the Tory conference, and the big question on everyone's minds is this new government finally up to the task of defending our values and culture? So, Peter, is there anything you've seen in the last few weeks that would point towards a shift in strategy towards culture in the new administration?
Honestly, Rollo, no. I think that there are a few sort of remarks people make or a few speeches that appear to be sort of encouraging, but in terms of tackling what I see as being the real problems, very little. And I think that, you know, as has been remarked upon today at this event, I think the problem is that the current government, the new government, they are, when it comes to culture, they're sort of either not interested or they don't quite understand how important it is and in fact how serious the situation is. When I say culture, we all know what I mean. I mean in terms of free speech, in terms of the huge woke infiltration and the left-wing infiltration of all of our institutions. This feeling there is that people have that no matter how you vote, the general leftward drift of society is what counts. And that certainly seems to be the case. You know, people say, oh, we've got a Tory government. Well, we've had one for, 12 years? And we've had an extraordinary cultural onslaught during that time. I find it hard in answer to a question to come up with anything really serious that they've done.
So you work in education being a big field in which we notice massive cultural onslaught. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes. I worked in a tertiary college, so of course it was almost a rule of thumb that there'd be a left-wing sociologist teacher banging on about Boris in the middle of a lesson rather than teaching the curriculum.
And was it really that bad?
I don't know if it was bad, but it was certainly something that ought not to happen. I think that the teachers should be at least politically neutral.
Because there's a sense that, you know, children being so impressionable, you've got to be very careful, haven't you, about giving them the full picture of things and letting them make their own minds up.
Absolutely. I have to say that the age group I was involved with were 16 to 19, so some of them were studying politics. But even then, I mean, it is, like you said, it's part of the learning experience to make up your own mind.
Do you then see education as one of the most important institutions to recapture first, being that it has such an effect on the next generations to come?
It would seem so, yes. I mean, it is the grassroots, really, of learning. And I think that having infiltrated, if you like to use that word, the education system, I think the left wing see it as an opportunity, a ripe opportunity for themselves to begin to re-educate students.
What's the biggest cultural issue facing us at the moment?
I think, honestly, immigration, because it's the biggest existential question of our day, mainly because, especially if people don't like a lot of these radical Labour MPs, one of the reasons why, and this is according to both Rishi Sunak's own research, by the way, and another paper that came out in 2015, what's his name? They'll essentially that first-generation immigrants, in terms of when they get on the electoral roll, sort of pack the deck against anyone else. And that's one specific one is that Migrant Rights Network did a study on this in 2015, when they noted in the top 16 London seats with the most first-generation immigrants on the electoral roll, and same outside of London, most of them were Labour in both cases.
What's the one policy you'd look for this government to enact that would tell you that the fight back against culture has really started?
Well, at the very least, like, have a little bit of reform of our police service. The fact that Douglas Murray has openly admitted that two senior police people, I can't remember their names, one of them West Midlands actually, openly essentially threatened violence against him. Or actually, I'm not sure if I can say it because of legal reasons, but he's put it on his article. That's his interpretation, not mine. Avoid legal reasons. Anyway, they essentially say these things. So if I was still a private man, I'd pull these people to one side saying you can't do that. That's technically intimidating a journalist. Sing a hook, please.
So you've been in the political game for a while and you've been aware of issues going on. it seems to me as though we all turned our back, and then when we look back round, all the institutions had fallen, and the whole thing had gone to. Would you have, being someone who's been in it for an extended period of time, do you have that perception too?
Yes, I think to some extent too, because my first degree was in sociology. Ironically, I read a lot of this stuff back in the 1980s, and it's permeated through. In fact, if you go back to that time, Roger Scruton did a series of articles in the Salisbury Review, which was published as a book called Thinkers of the New Left. And actually, it's intriguing going back to that. Those of us that have traced it way back to the 1980s, we didn't keep our eye on the ball, that's certainly true, but we were familiar with people like the Frankfurt School and these characters that were around. So it's grown up, and in some respect, yes, under the radar, and gradually undermined institutions in this country, and in particular in the United States, which tends to pick up on these things quicker than the UK, and has actually caused huge problems in the USA, I think.
Yeah, someone likened it to when termites infest a house.
Sure.
They sort of eat. You don't realise there's anything wrong until the whole thing collapses. Is that basically what we're saying?
Essentially, yes. I mean, I think that is the case. As everyone has said, a lot of people just adopt it because they think it's right on and decent and kind. And that's perfectly understandable up to a point. Nobody wants to be horrible, and nobody wants to be unkind to anyone who wants to see themselves in a different particular light. But the problem is that sort of attitude doesn't realise what's really behind this. And it is that sort of large-scale compliance of people who are thinking they're being kind, being manipulated by an ideology that is pernicious and extremely dangerous.
So, David, a new government, a new approach, a prime minister with, some things she's saying give us glimmers of light. Do you think we're going to see a new strategy when it comes to the culture war going forward?
It would be nice to think so. However, the confidence with which they've dealt with the economy does not, I'm afraid, encourage very high hopes, does it? I mean, frankly, governments are only as good as their ability to carry policy through. We've seen a major reversal of policy this morning. Here is a woman who very unwisely adopted neo-Thatcheritism, and I'm afraid we discovered that not only was the lady for turning, she was doing a pirouette and dancing on her toes at the end of it. That's not a very good start.
It's not. And do you think that, in order to take these cultural issues head on, it's going to need a leader that is, do you think that fighting back against these issues is going to require someone who can withstand onslaught from the media?
I think you're going to have three qualities. First, you've got to understand the issues. I would take a lot of persuading that I'm afraid Liz, who remember is a self-identified liberal and libertarian. In most ways, she's on their side, not on our side. That's the important thing. The real problem is liberalism. We refuse to admit this. The woke is simply the natural extension of liberalism gone mad. In the same way, the liberalism of the high Enlightenment finishes up on the horrors of the French Revolution, the 1960s finish up with murders in Germany and Italy. We're seeing another excess. Woke is just an excess of liberalism, and I'm afraid Liz Truss is a liberal. So that's not a very good start. The second is, if you were to have somebody, supposing her views were different from what they are, what you have to have is somebody who is capable of communicating. The culture wars can only be, dare I coin a little phrase, they can only be won by somebody who is cultured. I'm afraid I leave that remark suspended in the air. They need somebody who's got a gift of language, who's got a gift of clarity of expression, who preferably has got a gift of humour. Because, of course, what we have at the moment with our opponents in the culture wars, they're essentially Puritans. So they're humourless. They're bores, they're Malvolios. What you need is a Toby Belch who comes along and mocks and says, dost thou think because thou art virtuous there shall be no more cake and ale? So we would need a leader who could do that. And finally, you need a leader who can grasp ruthlessly, genuinely, the machinery of power. We have not seen such a figure since Tony Blair, who of course deployed it in entirely the wrong direction. So you've got to have understanding. You've got to have rhetorical flair, and you've got to have brutal administrative capacity. I see nobody.
So we see parallels in history of cultures going to battle and struggling for top place. So my question is, being where we are today and drawing upon parallels from the past, where do you see this going?
I think I am a historian, I'm not a prophet. I mean, you can see I've cited the earlier cases. I've cited the French Revolution. That consumes itself. Revolutions tend to eat themselves. Similarly, the excesses of Mao's version of the culture war, that was a cultural revolution too. It eats itself. The Puritan Revolution in England ate itself. New England Puritanism eats itself. That's the optimistic outcome. But they were not supported by the broad range of institutions and, above all, non-state organizations, companies and so on. And what's tended to happen, I think, is that you have, as always, particular elites were responsible for these things. But what you have now, you have a broad-based culture and middle-class elite that dominates virtually everything, that dominates the universities, that dominates employment, that dominates, above all, the professions. So much of what's going on now is the result of the perversions of the professions and professional regulation. And that's extraordinarily hard to break. So you're not simply talking about the operation of state power. You're talking about the takeover of whole swathes of social capital, institutions and whatever. In other words, I'm very pessimistic. But I think the only thing to do, again, we've been talking about lessons that one learns. The only possible reaction is, I think, I don't want to be cowed. I am not a coward. You fight. You don't necessarily expect to win.
Still fight.
But you fight.
Hello, Rafe. It's a new government. Do you think we'll see a new approach, an approach which the people that voted for the government in 2019 would approve of?
I have to say, things don't look very good. I think this is a very sad day, sad time for the Tory party and indeed for our members of the New Culture Forum, because I feel that there is no evidence that this current government has any intention of fulfilling any of the truly culturally conservative policies that people voted for in 2019. We've seen this government suggest and support the idea of further immigration to this country. We've seen no statements about anything to deal with the culture wars from this government. What we've seen really is 2019 with the election, and before that 2016 with Brexit, was supposed to be the moment when we had a great realignment in politics. One of the 2 or 3 points in history where politics has shifted. And on this occasion, economics was no longer going to be the cornerstone of your political ideology. It was going to be culture. So the old idea of left-wing, right-wing was no longer going to be about capitalism versus socialism. It was going to be cultural issues. That was understood by Dominic Cummings and by Boris Johnson. It seems as if none of those lessons have been learnt by Kwasi Kwarteng, Kamikaze, or by Liz Truss. And I'm very fearful for that, because the red wall vote upon which the Tory majority depends will feel rightly betrayed by this party by returning to the has-been policies and politics of the past. Economics has gone slightly to the left, centre-left, should I say, and culture's to the right. And what we're seeing right now with this current Conservative government is a reversal of that, a complete failure to understand the concerns, the desires, and the real worries of people who voted Tory in 2019. That is a betrayal as far as I'm concerned, and I worry very much. After the cataclysmic catastrophe that we saw with Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget, and the woodenness, the complete inability of Liz Truss to empathise or show any humanity in her public appearances, I fear that basically the Tory party can't hope to secure a victory at the next general election. I fear that we're going to see the Labour Party come in right now. I think 2 years is too little to show any economic success. And even if they did, it will be too late for that to happen. And I just essentially fear that we're in for a Labour government of some form or another, probably a Labour minority government, depending upon the Lib Dems or the SNP for their support. But the Tories will be out of power, I think, for the next 5, if not 10 years. And that poses another issue, if I can say, without going on too long, as I already have, is that if people who voted in 2019 had been restricted to those under 25, there wouldn't have been one Tory MP voted into power. And the problem is, if we have 10 years of Labour after this next general election, the demographics of the country, with immigration as well, will have shifted so far that I actually truly wonder whether we will ever see a Tory government in our lifetimes.
When we do see small glimmers of light, like for instance the Home Secretary pushing back against gender-critical ideology, can we view that as basically just window dressing and just appeasing the crowd?
Well, I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, it is important for people to say things. It really is. And, for example, during the statues, thing a few years ago when they were pulling statues down, President Macron of France just simply said quite clearly, we are not taking statues down in France. We do not do that. It's French history, for good or bad, it's French history. And that was very reassuring. That's the President of France saying it. Our Prime Minister during that period barely said anything. And then when he sort of finally did, it was sort of almost slightly jokey. It was like, oh, this is bad, we can't have this or whatever. So in other words, I think that it's the Conservative Party still seems to see these issues as somehow being sort of about PC gone mad, about somehow or other nonsense, student nonsense. Well, I'd say to you that it's not. That's the whole point of the NCF, the New Culture Forum. I see this as an attack on the very foundations of what we are. And I think the people who are attacking, they know what they're doing. But so far, we're the only kind of people who are actually calling them out on that, and certainly not, I'm afraid, conservative mainstream politicians.
This was Rollo Pignol at the NCF's event for Tory conference. 5 o'clock, time for tea.
Hello, if you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.